All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. I am here with James Kole. James, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so a little background on James. If you have not heard of him, he is a Forwardist candidate and current elected city council member of Laurel. He graduated from Penn State with a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Contracting. He's a former board member of the Landscape Contractors Association of Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. He was a grassroots leader in 2012 for the marriage equality vote in Maryland. He's the former commissioner on the City of Laurel Ethics Commission. He's a former chairman of the Laurel Environmental Affairs Committee. He's the current chairman of the Laurel Pride Committee, the current member of the Planning Commission and Historic District Commission. He's a current two-term Laurel City Councilman and first-term Laurel City Council president. And last November, James joined 5 other candidates around the country as some of the first forward-aligned candidates to win elections and the first to do so in Maryland. That is quite the bio. Thanks again for joining me.
Like I said, pleasure to be here. When I join something, I don't do it just a little bit. I go all the way.
Absolutely. Well, we certainly appreciate that. I just rambled off a bunch of very impressive accomplishments that are on your resume about you as a politician. Tell us a little bit about James Kole, the person.
The stuff about the politician, that's just something I do. Those are pretty easy committees, but me as a person, I like to be outside and I like to help other people. So that's how I got into landscaping. I'm avid gardener. I like to take walks, go hiking. Just it's a meditation form for me. So something to get away from the stress of daily life. Just get outside in nature and reconnect.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. We were talking about it before we started recording. Is my other half of my professional world is very much outside, and it's nice to have the balance there of because politics can be draining. Let's start from the beginning. For me, politics was something that was talked about at every dinner table. I had family that worked in politics, couldn't really escape it. Was that something that was discussed for you as a kid? How did you get into this world?
Not really. I mean, I grew up pretty rural area in Pennsylvania. We were pretty big in the church. There's always church politics, no matter which congregation you're in. That was kind of my first introduction, just people serving on family members serving on different committees in the church. I really didn't get into politics until I was in college. I was president of several organizations in college, and then while I was at home in Pennsylvania, I lived next to the mayor at the time, and there was a vacancy on the town council, and I was appointed to the borough council there temporarily till they were able to hold a special election, which I chose not to run in so I could return to university.
Wow, that must have been uh, quite a leap to make at that age. What kind of
I
inspired
was
you?
21. It was a small town, only 500 people.
Okay.
So it was 500 people, 7 borough council members, and a mayor. And it being in a small town, Borough Hall was just an old home that had been converted. So the dining room was the council chamber with just a dining room table that everybody sat around. It was a very different experience. But that
I'm sure.
sort of sparked me into politics and trying to watch more closely what's going on around me. But that's also where I realized that local government is where you can make more change that directly impacts everybody's life. Everybody thinks of state and national politics, but local politics, the local level is where you can really impact your neighbors' lives and make a change for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. There is the hyperfixation on national politics. I mean, everybody just jumps to the presidential. I mean, that was what came up with Forward right away. Is people are like, "Oh my God, you're going to spoil the presidential election," and there's not running a presidential candidate. We're not getting involved in that. Oh, we don't want to be spoilers, but more than anything, want to make an impact where people feel it, which is in state and local government. I feel like just this election cycle, we're starting to see that kind of awakening in state level politics. People are
Mhm.
starting to realize. How important their state house representatives are, especially when it comes to topics like abortion. And now that that's been sent down to the states, that's spotlighted that. But I look forward to people realizing that their city and local officials are equally important to the things that actually impact their life on a daily basis. So I mentioned at the top, you were the first elected official to align publicly with Ford in Maryland. You were already in office when you did so, but you were also just a few days before reelection, or an election that we were hoping was going to be a reelection. And as we've approached candidates from left to right to center, there always starts with some hesitancy around, I don't know, third parties. If they're already in office, they kind of feel safe. They don't really want to rock the boat. If they're not in office, they want to make sure the brand aligns and the beliefs align, which all makes sense. Uh, you were sold from the jump pretty much. If I'm not mistaken, you met us at an event, and days later there was an interview, and not long after that, you publicly aligned with us. What gave you the courage, or gave you the confidence to just jump right in right before an election?
I've always been an independent, even in college. I would only register with a party so that I could participate in primaries. So sometimes I was a Democrat, sometimes I was a Republican, just depending on who was on the primary ballot. I did meet Forward at an event in Laurel. And then being in the middle of a campaign, I didn't get back to them right away. So that event was about 3 weeks before the election. And it took me about 2 weeks to remember, hey, I need to reach out to this organization. But when I met with everyone at Forward, it just felt like a fit. It's not one way or the other. It's about talking to each other and getting back to what politics used to be. We used to work together. We used to compromise. Now it's just so polarized that nothing gets done. One side's always upset. I mean, if if we want to move forward as a country, we need to make sure that we're talking to each other and compromising on both sides. If both people aren't walking away giving something up, then we're not truly working for the people.
The tribalism, I won't say the tribalism has never been worse, because it has, but it's certainly the worst it's been in recent memory, or at least for anyone in our lifetime. Uh, it's one of the reasons that Ford there's a strong focus on not just your standard policies that you go down whatever the five or six big ones are that are usually national level issues that we're interrogating local elected officials about, even though there's no vote in Congress to be had there. But we're focusing on election reform as a part of that, because the incentives for people once they get in office are not aligned with what people can actually benefit from. You're someone who jumped right at election reform when we talked about it. It was one of the first policy that you said needs to be researched, looked into. uh, do you have any plans, or is Laurel looking at anything in the election reform world?
We are. We're currently we have some things that we can't discuss at the moment. Looking for uh, some different attorneys that can give us advice. We're a little different than most municipalities in the state and how our government is structured. So we're looking to how we can change those in the near future, and then probably the next 5 to 6 months. There should be legislation to appoint an independent reform task force that will look at that and give it to recommendations to council before the next election.
If we can't get into it, just let me know. But I am curious. Recently Maryland shot down ranked choice voting. In the city of Rockville, where I live, it was going to be on the ballot as a kind of poll question. I can't remember the exact terminology, but basically they wanted to see where the electorate was at on it, and it got stripped away before it even made it to the ballot. Is ranked choice voting something that you personally, not necessarily the city of Laurel, the city council, but you personally are interested in, or is there a different priority there around redistricting? What do you think are kind of some of the biggest issues there?
For us, we will be redistricting. We've had population shifts, so that's just a given for us. But for ranked choice voting, that was one of the things that drew me to the Forward Party. Was the ranked choice voting. I've been a strong proponent of that, especially in an election in a small town where you might have 3 or 4 candidates with no primary. That's the way you get a result that everybody can be satisfied with without somebody winning by a small margin. For us, as we move forward, before we can get people on board with it, we would need to look at how our elected offices are set up. Right now, it's the top 2 vote getters are elected to that ward, and it's very complicated with ranked choice voting. If we were to introduce that, we want something that's very easy for constituents to be able to just select for those candidates. We don't want to make it too complicated. The harder you make something, the less successful it's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's often, I feel like, one of the biggest hesitations around ranked choice voting is people are worried it's too complicated, and it can be if implemented poorly. So that's it's wise to make sure that every angle is being looked at so it can be implemented successfully, and then hopefully give people uh, the freedom to express their beliefs without worrying about spoiler effects or somebody winning with 51% of the vote and 49% of the town or city or state is unhappy. Outside of election reform, another thing that you campaigned on and you've been passionate about is the environment. Um, you know, the environment, the climate crisis. It's a global problem that is kind of even hard to put into scale. What do you think is local government's role in that effort, in that fight?
It really depends on which government you're in. Someplace like Laurel, where we have our own zoning authority, we can make a bit more impact. Other municipalities that rely on the county for their zoning, they don't have as much say. I think what we can do at our level, though, is make sure that we're replanting the trees, controlling stormwater runoff. But when it comes to reform, again, it's compromise. Some people are going to say you're going too far. Other people are going to say you're not going far enough. So it's where's that middle ground that we can all agree on? A lot of times what I see is if you look back at some of the larger HOA developments that are 20, 30 years old, there's still just a lot of grass. There's no trees. So changing changing our policies on what trees get replaced, how many you have to plant, what happens if you take a tree down. Simple changes can make a big impact going forward. We won't see it now, but 20 to 30 years from now, we'll have mature tree canopies and really push forward with carbon sequestration by the tree canopy.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about earlier where local government can make that bigger impact than large federal sweeping legislation that may get repealed or takes 20 years, 30 years to unfold. Whereas I feel you can feel those changes a lot more at home when those decisions are made locally.
Mhm. And Maryland's done a great job. There's some forest conservation legislation that goes into effect July 1. It was passed in the 2023 session. Prince George's County and other counties are changing their policies to reflect that. The city of Laurel will be doing the same. So as long as everybody's funding those projects and meeting the standards, we should start to see some change in the next couple of years.
Outside of politics, you're in the landscaping business.
Mhm.
So outdoors politics, we're merging there again. How do enhanced environmental sustainability initiatives and the work you do outside of politics relate to one another? Here in Montgomery County, the county council passed a ban on gas-powered leaf blowers, the sale of gas-powered leaf blowers that takes effect this summer, and then the use of those leaf blowers will be banned in 2025, summer 2025. I know it's not your county, but I'm just curious, what your thoughts on that legislation is. As someone who has their hands in both those worlds, you're uniquely qualified to talk about that, I feel like, and just living in both those worlds, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so I actually had to deal with this on a professional level. I manage landscaping in the District of Columbia, which banned all gas-powered blowers that are handheld or backpack in January of 2022. So that was their deadline. They started it much earlier than the other surrounding jurisdictions. And I actually met with some of the Maryland state delegates that were big proponents of the Montgomery County bill. Leaf blowers are very polluting. You can smell them down the block. What we need to realize as politicians is there's supply chain problems. And there's also cost problems. A typical gas-powered blower costs about $400. That electric blower needs a specialized battery. That battery is $900 and lasts about an hour and a half. So as landscapers and homeowners were switching over, they don't have the infrastructure. There's not enough power coming into their facilities, so they got to get with the utility company to beef that up. They need to buy an extensive amount of batteries just to keep up with the demand of the day. So as we are implementing this technology, we need to make sure we're incentivizing it and realizing what the businesses have to go through. What a homeowner might need is fine, but a professional business or parks and recreation, somebody that's running a full crew and using that blower 6 or 7 hours a day, you've suddenly added $7,000 worth of equipment for just one person for the day.
Yeah, and given a relatively short time frame to overhaul your fleet, which is not an inexpensive endeavor.
Nope. And a lot
Um,
of the materials for the batteries come from Ukraine. So there were supply chain issues as the war started. So it's either coming from Ukraine or China. We don't make a lot of our own batteries here.
is that are there still those supply chain? Obviously, the war in Ukraine still ongoing. Is that supply chain, has that pivoted at all, or are we still facing some of those
Um,
problems?
the supply chain issues with battery has leveled itself out. At the same time that DC was rolling out their legislation, California banned electric blowers or banned gas blowers on the entire state. So there was a whole state trying to convert. So with that now implemented, there's more on the market, so it's stabilized.
Gotcha. Do you know if, and I know it's far from where we live, so if you don't know, no problem. But did California just do that? You know, Montgomery County's taking this. All right, you can't sell them starting this time, and then a year later you can't use them. Did California just all at once they're out?
They phased them in. I can't remember when theirs started. I think they started phasing them out in 2019 or 2020.
Okay.
And there were some other municipalities in Maryland that also started banning them early. Like I know Chevy Chase banned gas blowers starting in, they followed DC. They were on the same time schedule.
Enough leaf blower talk for now. I'm sure some people tuned out, but I found that one very interesting and couldn't think of somebody probably more qualified in our network to talk to about that issue as someone who can see both sides of it from an environmental sustainability aspect, but also someone who's impacted in their business by those laws. Um, Another thing that you campaigned on and have worked on is just continuing fiscal responsibility in the city of Laurel. This is something that candidates love to run on, voters love to hear, but I feel like sometimes when you ask voters like, what does that look like, or candidates, what does that look like, you get different answers. So I'm curious to you and the city of Laurel, what does fiscal responsibility look like, and how does that practice impact Laurel residents?
Yep. So it is something that I feel is unique, at least with me. I do run a landscape operation, so I've got many years of running a budget. The city's just a much larger budget. So fiscal responsibility for me is making sure we're not spending on what we don't need to. Run as lean as possible. Can that person be made more efficient by getting them some technology versus just adding more bodies? The most expensive thing that any operation, whether it's private industry or government, has is their people. People are the most expensive component of a budget. So when we're looking at fiscal responsibility, we only have certain tax revenue coming in at the municipal level. We rely so about 70% of Laurel's budget comes from just property tax, and nobody wants to raise property tax. So what can we do? Do we need to really have that project? Have we gotten enough bids for this? Is there somewhere that we can choose another vendor? Really looking at that stuff. And at the end of the day, you are going to come to a point where you can't save any more money, and you do have to look at raising taxes and adding those positions. So when I say fiscal responsibility, it's not that we're not going to spend the money, but to me, it's, are we spending the money wisely?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And obviously the world of technology has gotten, it's been evolving significantly throughout our lifetime, but the last couple of years have offered an especially unique opportunity there in terms of allowing business or business operations budget, entities to become more efficient. So I'm sure you guys are far from the only city council that's exploring those kind of options to not raise taxes on the residents, but also follow through on services and programs that will
Yeah.
benefit everyone.
A lot of people, when they say fiscal responsibility, people automatically think they're just not going to spend any more money and that they're not raising taxes. And for me, that's not the case. For me, it's just making sure that we're being responsible and doing our fiduciary responsibility to our constituents.
Getting close to the end of my questions here. Is there anything that we didn't touch on today that you want the people to know about you or the city of Laurel? Just anything you want to share?
I'm sure there is. Nothing's coming to mind right now. I'm a pretty
Okay.
open book. If you reach out to me, a good public servant responds to their constituents. So if you reach out, have other questions, I will try to get back to you in a timely manner. There's nothing worse than somebody reaching out and not getting an answer. So if you do have more questions, please feel free to reach out to me at jcole, Kole, at laurel.md.us. And I'll get back to you and maybe set up a meeting if you have more questions.
And if you live outside of Laurel or if you live inside of Laurel, you can also find more information on James on the Maryland Forward Party website. He has got a candidate page there. It's got, a bio, a lot of things we've talked about today. I'm not sure if his email is on there, but you just got it right here. My last question is kind of a fun one, I hope. One of the pillars of Forward is being open to different points of views on a wide range of topics, not my way or the highway, just trying to find that collaboration and consensus. Can you give us an example of a time that you compromised or changed your mind on something when presented with new evidence, either professionally or on the city council?
I'm sure there are. There's one that's coming to mind that I can't talk about right now.
No worries.
It's some pending items before the council that we're working on, but I can't think of in the past right now. I know there are
No
some.
worries. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll circle back when we can talk about that one, and I'm sure people will be interested. Again, oh, one more thing we should probably note: if you liked this interview and you're going to vote next month or in November, my understanding is you will not see James on the ballot because his election has already happened. It's not in line with the big main primary and presidential election. So James has already won and is in his second term here. So if you want to support him, I'm sure there are ways, but you don't need to do it that way in the coming month or so. Well, James, thanks a lot for joining me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope people did as well. And you know where to reach us if you ever need anything.
Thank you very much, Matt.